by Sam. Would you like to explain your thought process behind the selection?
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty simple in this particular case. Just that I've listened to Lustmord just as kind of, one of my go-to dark ambient for a long time now. And the other day, as I was having a massive drop in blood pressure, which has to do with some ongoing health stuff that I've been investigating, kind of took me out of commission, and I was like, I'm gonna have to sit here, lay here in the dark for a while, so might as well look through Lustmord's catalog and see if he's come out with anything new. And turns out there's a fair amount of interesting stuff that he's released recently. I saw Trinity, and I saw Trinity and the album art, and figured it would obviously be about the Manhattan Project and the sort of implications that has had for us as a species. And it very much was. So yeah, I listened to it kind of under those circumstances, and just thought that this would be an interesting pick particularly for a week that, during a period where we haven't had, as many, attendance has been such that I'm not as worried about alienating some of the people who prefer stuff that's a little less, dark ambient in terms of pacing and speed of evolution of track. This was definitely more of a meditation than anything else, but it's an effective one nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you and I are probably. I mean, I don't know how Kayla is or anything.
Yeah.
But probably the most friendly towards the genre.
Yeah.
Because certainly I know that Brian doesn't like ambient music at all.
Yep.
But yeah. What to say about this album?
Yeah, it's definitely harder to talk about, right? It's something that I think affects you, and it will affect everyone differently, kind of based on the mood and the sort of it's kind of music like this tends to function a little more like psychedelic drugs than that. It's very much a matter of what you take into it as much as anything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think here his sounds, his very few. I think there are only two major interview segments and vocal samples, or at least coherent vocal samples that get used. Right. One's from the infamous, Oppenheimer quoting the Bhagavad Gita, discussing the reactions of people to the first testing of the nuclear bomb, and then the second one was pulled from an interview with someone who was presumably just nearby, somewhere that another test had taken place. I think it was the same Trinity test, but as perceived by somebody who was not on the project, right? And I don't know that I'd ever heard that snippet of audio before. The woman talking about the fact that her blind sister was able to see the flashes of fucking what are presumably really, really high energy photons. Something about that really drives home the kind of chilling primal power being unleashed.
That's a good way to put it.
The fact that it's perceptible to eyes that no longer detect light in the visible EM spectrum.
Yeah.
Because it is the sort of thing where, when you're out in space, astronauts discuss the fact that every once in a while, radiation, a stray particle will pass through your brain and cause little flashes of light, and just realizing that, you know, that's something that we caged and put in a weapon.
Yeah. On a massive scale. Yeah.
And I think in particular what this album does really well is kind of, because I think, you know, for you and I, we grew up post Cold War, right?
Yeah,
For
well
us,
post Cold War, yeah.
So like nuclear proliferation is like not, we haven't existed in a world prior to it, right?
Right, it's
We
just been
haven't
a fact of
existed,
life.
and you know, we sort of take for granted, you know, none of these weapons have been deployed in our lifetime. I think we've all seen, you know, some of the iconic footage, but like the truly world-ending power that sleeps in a lot of our missile silos is something that we don't really, that we've had demonstrated through pop culture and through history education, but I don't think the emotional weight of that is really tangible for most of us. We're sort of jaded to it. And I think this album does a really good job of kind of reattuning that sense of just how really just fundamentally chilling these fucking weapons are. You know, there's a moment in, I think it's White Sands, where there's this recurring like foghorn sound, you know, bass drone, offset by all of these atonal wandering strings, and you just get the sense of this caged and horrific beast that's been chained somewhere deep down in the earth and is just waiting to be unleashed. And for me, you know, again, this is where we get to the kind of psychedelic set and setting type thing, because I went in knowing what the album was nominally about. It would be hard to miss if you're an English speaker, particularly once the Oppenheimer quote comes in.
Right.
And with the titling of the track. But it just makes me think about, you know, the nuclear waste disposal sites out in, I think it's New Mexico, where, you know, immense thought and energy has been put into constructing these facilities in such a way that they scream in every conceivable language that you should get the fuck out. That, you know, what has been entombed there should not be released. And it's funny that with nuclear waste, you know, we're taking that approach. You know, it's like it's something like 40 different languages they've written, you know, written that like this what has been sealed here has been sealed here for good reason. It will kill you if you go any deeper. The fact that facility actually exists, you know, and that, you know, anthropologists and philosophers were all consulted in trying to figure out what message would like buck curiosity and communicate in no uncertain terms, sheer like just festering evil that we are putting there to wait on the geological timescales it takes for this stuff to become safe to be in the same room.
Right. Yeah.
And I think really more than anything for me at least, based just the pacing and like everything about the way it's constructed really does convey the sense of the horrific like loss associated with the use of these weapons, but also just the fact that they are this simmering, sinister background noise, you know, that has faded in many ways from popular awareness, despite being the sort of thing that's still, you know, being used as a pretext for like saber rattling with Iran, all sorts of other things. Like, we really have lost our sense of just how truly horrifying our capacity to destroy one another has become.
Yeah.
In that way, I feel like it's kind of a timely album, you know, as we see, you know, particularly in 2020 and the beginning of 2021, you know, all these people, this kind of yearning for the apocalypse that has seized the human imagination right now. because in many ways the world is fucked as it currently is, and people understandably want change, but like something that conveys just how really like geologically and just like cosmic scale terrifying the things that we still haven't really unleashed on a global scale and are just waiting there, to me is a useful meditation and a reminder.
Right. And I suppose what's equally terrifying, or what makes it so dreadful, is that it's not like this is some natural, like, weapon that we have just, like, oh, we're just taking control of it. No, we specifically built this for the purpose of extermination, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, it's hard not to personify destruction in that way, because that's what it was built for. That was the initial intent.
Yeah.
Was to be the be-all, end-all. And we still have it.
Yeah. And I think, like any kind of Faustian bargain, what is interesting about these things, and again, interesting in at least what to me it feels like a characterization of the weapons themselves, right? Or at least the potential they embody, for lack of a better term, is really the sense that this capacity was something that was dormant in nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really occur naturally, but that it was something that we had to, like any demon out of myth, we had to make a deal with.
Mm-hmm.
We had to actively entreat. It would not have just come into being on its own. It was this human malice that was necessary in order to unleash these things. And the fact that it's still there is this kind of corrupt and sinister, fragment of our own collective psyche in many ways. Again, just sleeping in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as far as I know, nuclear fission does not happen naturally.
At least on that, yeah, like decay, nuclear decay does.
All right.
There are naturally radioactive materials, but yeah, on that like scale, the like chain reaction,
Right.
that is not something that would have occurred here without our contrivance.
All right. Yeah, and I think the album captures that really well. I mean, I suppose with any dark ambient, or any ambient music really, it'll give you a tone, right? But most of the actual meaning is sort of self-derived. There's not, it's like, yeah, I don't know. Like in the dark, when you're in a dark room and you're seeing little shapes and, your brain says, oh, that's a person standing there. That's sort of what it is. It's your mind putting the pieces together as opposed to the pieces just being there because, it's ambient, so it's kind of stretched out and not super active. But in terms of tone, yeah, I think this does capture that sort of dark, that feeling of dread and of... There's a word, and I just don't know what it is. I feel like I know the word. I don't know. This is 2020. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know Lustmord, which I didn't know super well, prior to this. It's one guy, and he's been doing it since 1981. Before ambient music was really what it is. His
story's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Like his whole, because I guess he sort of came up alongside like industrial acts in the UK, but a lot of how he got in touch with them and a lot of the people he worked with was basically he would just like pretend that he was booked as an opener and would just like basically show up on stage and like do his thing until security removed him.
That's genius.
By showing up at various places. Yeah. It's clever, but it's also like this was the kind of stuff he was making, and it's just being, opening for God knows who. With something like this, the kind of shock and awe effect I feel like that would have on an audience is hilarious. But he's collaborated with, I think he's collaborated with Tool. He's collaborated with Melvins. He has shown up in a lot of interesting places and worked with a lot of interesting people.
I'm reading the Wikipedia page. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
He helped with the score for Planescape Torment.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that classic.
Jesus, that's really cool. Actually, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that he worked on that. He does do a lot of media composition stuff. I mean, it is the sort of thing, like, clearly a lot of his strengths are in sound design.
Yeah.
So, working in, again, media composition makes a lot of sense as a way to pay the bills, since I'm gonna guess that this kind of stuff, probably at best of times, like, breaks even. Maybe makes some money.
Right.
Which isn't to say that there's not a huge audience for these kind of things. It's just that, you're not going to find the genre, and the music itself is so like geared towards the sedate that, the kind of like, oh man, I got to go to a concert, I would love to be at a Lustmord concert. I do think that would be a really cool experience. But I think in general, it's not going to, not going to sell out stadiums.
No, you have to be the biggest. In terms of ambient music, only the very, very biggest are going to, like, have any kind of, like Brian Eno might, he wouldn't even sell out a stadium, but, a big venue, or someone like Sigur Rós or something like that, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, more post-rock.
Yeah. But also in terms of monetization in the modern era, having a 6-track album where 2 of the tracks are over 10 minutes long, isn't going to make you very much money.
Yeah,
that's just how it works.
Yeah, I did manage to track down one interview with him that was kind of interesting. I guess his original attempt as an artist was actually going into like visual art. He went to an art school in the UK for a brief time, but then sort of discovered that sound was a medium he worked with a lot. He was better able to communicate what he wanted to do in sound than in visual media. Which I just thought was kind of a neat note. Because, yeah, he doesn't come at it... I forget... There was a moment in the interview where I think the interviewer asked, like, have you ever thought about composing in a major key? And he's like, I wouldn't even know what a major key is. So he's coming at it from this like totally atypical perspective as a musician.
Yeah, that's a good response.
Yeah. So somebody, yeah, who's clearly thinking purely in terms of sound, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, a lot of the music we get exposed to will have those, you know, theoretical structures kind of embedded in it. So we'll wind up recreating them, and a lot of instruments are designed in such a way that you can't not utilize those structures and play them. But, yeah. It just brings me back to some of the discussions we've had, you know, in previous music clubs about how there are such different intents and approaches that are taken to the process of creating music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember just lucking into this weird like sound, just experimental sound night. Like when I was out on the East Coast in Philadelphia, I think, and there was basically what amounted to like a dark ambient performance in this completely dark church, like old Gothic style, cathedral, and it's incredible the way that, because the pacing is slower and because it is much more like a psychedelic experience, this music can be transformative and revelatory in a very different way than a lot of music that's more like constructed as songs. And you know, like bangers will be super emotionally resonant and maybe have some like perceptive lines, but this stuff gets you thinking in fundamentally different ways than at least culturally we're used to thinking. And sets up a very interesting psychoacoustic space to occupy.
Yeah, I'm reminded of one time I went to a noise show that was in a church. That's what made me think of it. And let me tell you, I'm not... Okay. Doing poppers at a noise show, having the tingle go all the way down your body as the fucking sound waves vibrate it was an amazing experience. That's all I can say for that. I do wish there was more of a live space for music like this. Like, you don't get a lot of live shows that are like this, but I think why? Because it's this type of ambient music, while this sounded meticulously crafted, can be sort of performed and constructed in a live format. So you could have unique ambient sets and stuff like that with like you just get interesting textures and stuff.
Yeah.
And you don't. I mean, maybe that's just a me problem of living in.
No, but it's interesting you say that, because when in the interview, I guess, you know, he talked about doing live shows, and he actually doesn't just play the album back to front, right? He actually takes multiple tracks from across his catalog, and you know, it kind of recombines them in interesting ways.
Like a DJ.
Yeah.
Except.
Yeah.
With the very different philosophy.
Yeah, but it does remind me of, I remember in Comparative Religions reading an article on, you know, like DJs, particularly like rave DJs, as being basically, you know, techno shamans in a certain way, right? Like leading what amount to kind of religious shared, quasi-religious at least, shared experiences for people. And these, I think, you know, dark ambient shows, such as they are, are similarly pretty religious and contemplative in nature, right? It's less about, you know, the fact that they seem to gravitate to these, you know, cathedral-like spaces. I mean, that's in no small part because at that point you're getting a free reverb, right?
Yeah.
And the same kind of reverb that you would be using, you know, the same kind of massive space reverb that are typically used in this kind of music.
Right, and it probably sounds way better than a plug-in.
Yeah. Yeah, and more, certainly more situated.
Yeah.
But I think there's a clear psychological effect that just those kinds of spaces have on us, both because of the sheer, like, purely acoustic qualities and also because of, you know, the cultural connotations we associate. And the fact that these tend to gravitate to churches or at least church-like spaces does communicate this sort of sense that, you know, the intent of this kind of music, and even, again, like even dance music in general, which tends to be more repetitive, slower, right? Not slower, but it evolves at a slower rate than like a pop sing, is really about communing with something larger than oneself, right? Immersing oneself in something greater than themselves. And being transformed by that process of immersion and expansion.
Yeah. Yeah, being led by the techno shaman.
Yeah.
To the peaks and valleys.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's why I think any DJ will tell you, you know, there have to be peaks and valleys and arcs to a night, even when you are pulling from a bunch of disparate sources, right? And yeah, I know there is something resembling, or there was rather. I mean, it's COVID now, so we live in the era of the pandemic, so like live music in general is just kind of dead. But there was something of an audience for ambient music, but it was usually in cities that are at least like slightly larger or at least more centralized than the one we live in. Like I know Robert Rich would do I think what were called like sleep concerts. You know, they'd be like overnight affairs of like, it's like 8 continuous hours of ambient music and people are welcome to pass out. That sort of thing. And again, you know, knowing that like I forget how the fuck we found it. If it was like somebody that I knew who lived in the area told me about it, but like just finding that performance in the church in Philly, right? These larger cities seem to have spaces for these kind of things, but they are underground and out of the way in many cases. Like you have to sort of be in the scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I hope is something that can start to change post-pandemic.
Well,
assuming there will be such a time.
Yeah. Well, there definitely will be such a time. Well, what it will look like, who knows? But even, you know, the Black Death, which we did not have a vaccine for, eventually went away. Yeah. Which was a much more easily communicable disease, so. But it did take like a decade.
Yeah, and I just mean on like a reasonable time scale.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, you know, not our children, or at least our generation's children. Yeah, maybe we can get Zoomers into dark ambient.
It's like the complete opposite of hyperpop. Kind of makes me wonder.
True. Which I think they need, and they just don't know that they need it. Yeah, I don't know. How do we make dark ambient cool? I feel like ambient music in general, aside from like falling asleep and stuff like that, is more of an adult genre. I feel like teenagers and stuff don't really listen to ambient music. I mean, obviously there will be some.
Yeah.
But like I don't know. You can't like no one in high school was talking about how cool Godspeed You Black Emperor is, you know what I'm saying? Like no one. Maybe.
At least not the cool kids. The alt kids, I think, would be into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I have no idea. Again, weird being pretty goddamn young in the grand scheme of things and still feeling like a relic when I listen to shit like hyperpop, just being like, good God.
Some hyperpop is okay.
Yeah. I'm not saying I think it's bad. It's like the first, it's as like expansive as I have tried to keep my music taste. It's one of the first genres that I like don't feel like I totally get. Which I am working to remedy.
That's fair. I get it. I don't like it. I mean, I should say it this way. There's a lot of it that's intentionally bad. And intentionally... And that's sort of like punk. I get it. Like, that's sort of like, oh, okay, we're gonna just break genre conventions. I think, at least in my high school years, the equivalent would have been like, Lil B, right? Where it's like catchy and it's like very mimetic, but it's not, you wouldn't think, oh, this really, like, anyone could do it. Really what the value is the memes and not the performances.
Yeah. Well, and I think in many ways, just the willingness to commit.
Right.
'Cause it's certainly not a subtle genre, based on what I've heard.
Yeah, that's sort of the critique, the point. I think it's a critique of,
Yeah.
Our capitalist pop, whatever. But, but also then you get, artists like Charlie XCX and stuff like that, which are very much so part of the big capitalist pop systems, who then appropriate, hyperpop and stuff like that.
Because that's the way it goes.
Right. Right. I mean, I am very wary of super successful pop artists that try to go a new direction or anything.
Yeah.
Always. Which I guess, it wasn't that much of a change for her, and it's not like everything she does is hyperpop, but she calls herself hyperpop, and, her, I don't know, Twitter stans are annoying.
But
my earphones were backwards.
Kind of returning to the point of there being the idea of there being like a community or a fandom for dark ambient, or like the idea of it being cool. I will say, perhaps, not even perhaps, just speaking from a position of clear bias here, I do think the audience for and following, and like culture that emerges around something like dark ambient or ambient music in general is just sort of the like classic kind of cool, in that it doesn't really care what anyone thinks about it. It's not grasping for a larger audience. It's not grasping for greater influence, right? It just exists as this kind of interesting, quasi-sacred set of experiences.
I have two things to say about that. One, dark ambient is a sigma male, from what you just described. The new type of male. And
I might need to have that explained to me.
oh, okay, so there was these you know, the like, oh, alpha male, beta male, whatever, right? And it's sort of like this culture. It's sort of kind of close to the like red pill and like pickup artist culture of like trying to be alpha. Well, people are like, oh, there's a new type of male. It's the Sigma male. Just doesn't give a fuck and is okay with being introverted and just, you know, marches to the beat of their own drum. And people are like, this, you're just, like, this A isn't a new thing, but also
comfortable with yourself.
Yeah. It's like an introvert that's comfortable with themselves, and the example that people use is like Keanu Reeves, right? It's a very like Reddit tier, like, you know what I'm saying?
Fucking stupid.
Right, it's stupid as fuck. Trying to classify people's personalities in terms of alpha, beta, delta, gamma, whatever is dumb. But yeah, there's just a bunch of memes about it, which is why I brought it up. The other thing, you said classical cool, and I imagined the Fawns hitting the jukebox, and then Lustmord starts playing.
I guess I mean more, you know, the like bohemian cool, right? The just, which admittedly we could argue that there's a class critique of that kind of whole culture to be made. But I think precisely because of the slow pace, right? Like it's a genre that's pretty like inherently anathema to like egocentrism, and any like of the kind of like massive performativity that you would expect, right? Like, you know, if there's somebody at the dark ambient show doing a bunch of like, who's like, basically, if you come to the dark ambient show to like try and be recognized and go and make friends with everybody, it's like, this is not an extroverted event, right? That's not to say that conversations don't happen between sets, but like the idea of somebody going to a dark ambient show for clout, I guess.
Yeah.
Nobody there will think you're cool.
No. Yeah, no. No, yeah.
It is, in general, just a more inherently introspective medium, and again, it tends to decenter the kind of egocentrism you'd see in, you know, rock stars. You know,
right.
Work to counteract it, at least. I think you absolutely have control freaks making this music.
Oh, sure.
But being a control freak and being I guess, you know, one could argue that they're similar, but there's no, like, it's not like a self-congratulatory thing. It's
yeah.
Like, you know, these are people who are very dedicated to their craft.
Right. I think that's what makes it not egocentric is, I mean, the craft may represent themselves, but what they would be control freak about is the craft itself and not their image and perception and stuff like that.
Yeah, because again, if you're in this for validation, why are you making this genre of music?
Yeah, you would never. I mean, we've already talked about how sort of not unpopular, but you know, it is. It would be a very unobvious genre unless you had a very specific crush that you were trying to impress. Ugh. By getting at me, if you're trying to impress me by getting into dark ambient. But yeah, no. If you're trying to be cool, you're gonna be a rapper, or you're gonna do some like EDM thing or something.
Yeah. Which I should, you know, clarify. It does not in any way lessen the value of the work and creative output of people in those genres. It's
Absolutely.
just, you know, it's a completely different psychology and ethos of music making in the ambient space. You're doing it for very different reasons.
Right.
even if the fundamental reason is still the same, you know, that being self-expression and the creation of
Right.
just the act of creation.
Right. And, you know, when you release 15-minute long songs, you have to sort of expect that a lot of people who listen to your music aren't going to get all the way through the song. Like, I mean, like, people who like listening to ambient music are going to just, like, put it on and listen to it. But, like, if you, like, show your friends or something who aren't, they're going to listen to a couple minutes of it and then be like, oh, that was really good. They're not going to listen to 15 minutes long or brrr.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, I think it has to be separate from the validation.
Yeah. Although, again, knowing that, you know, the artist here fucking started playing, just got on stage, shows he wasn't booked for. That's awesome.
That's so funny.
You kind of wonder. It does, you know, it does make me wonder what the motivation there was, other than just wanting to expose people to it. You know, feeling like you'd created something that you wanted to offer people. And
Yeah.
completely willing to make a bunch of people go like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, to get banned from venues and stuff.
Yeah. Just on the off chance that, yeah, there'd be somebody there, you know, a handful of people there who kind of resonate with it.
Right. I'm like, how do you even get away with that? Because, like...
Now, probably you just don't.
Yeah. Because I'm like... I guess all you would need is, like... a 1/4 inch in, right? And then you can just plug your... whatever that you're using. Because, like, if you're setting up, like, gear and stuff... One would think that would be the point when the venue would be like, huh? Who are you? I don't know. Like, as someone who's worked as a sound guy, if someone just was like, hey, plug this in, I'd be like, who are you? Yeah. Why? I'm like, no, okay. I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's what part of what makes it so brilliant. I guess it's social engineering. It's hacking. It's hacking. Yeah. Yeah, what else? There aren't lyrics. There are instruments.
And again, yeah, what spoken content, what semantic content there is just the fragments of speech from interviews.
Right, is completely sampled. I wouldn't exactly call that a lyric. Yeah. Though, I suppose it could be. I could see an argument either way. Originally encouraged to work with sound by industrial music founders Throbbing Gristle, he became a member of influential group SPK in the 1980s. Tool, Melvins, Westmoreland, Paul Haslinger, Maynard James Keenan. Source recordings that include caves, crypts, car crashes, cosmological activity, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and the site of the first ever nuclear detonation. I'm just reading his about page on his website.
Jesus Christ.
He's got a lot of albums.
Yep.
Like, so much.
It's really, really incredible amount of music.
Yeah.
Which, again, I think a high throughput mixing and mastering this stuff probably like takes forever, just because it's such a long period. You know, it's just a lot of audio to work with.
Right.
It is the sort of thing where, like, turnaround time you know, you can output more of it because it evolves more slowly. It requires fewer discrete.
Yeah.
I say this having written both in both genres, right? Like, you know, you can make. I think making good ambient takes a lot more time than making just something that would pass as ambient. But in general, you know, you can make a serviceable ambient track, and then move on to the next one much more quickly than you can work through like more discrete within, you know, within like a more popular genre convention songs.
Right.
Just because
I mean, there are just less aspects.
Doing a lot more with a lot less.
Yeah, there are just less aspects to ambient music. There are less things going on. You're not going to have... I mean, you might have a shit ton of layers. They're all happening at the same time and are subtly affecting one another.
Yeah, and a ton of processing.
Yeah, but you don't have, like, parts, right? They have to balance. You don't have a bass line and guitars and a keyboard and vocals that you all have to balance with each other and make sure that, you know, it's just sort of one sound or a few sounds. So yeah, I mean, the approach even to mixing, mastering, I guess, would be sort of similar because it's already made at that point, but the approach even to mixing ambient music is entirely different than just like rock or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I could see that. Definitely.
Yeah. And I comment that in no small part because, you know, if you look at ambient artists in general, like looking through their catalogs, you'll see they get a lot of scoring work. There will usually be soundtracks for like television shows or movies or games showing up in addition to their like mainline releases, and B, there are just so many albums from these people. And again, like it's a different craft. It requires a surprisingly subtle touch to make this stuff work. But it is the sort of thing where, yeah, you'll find a couple of interesting audio sources, and you'll just play with and slowly evolve an idea over a very long time scale, rather than going like, okay, it's been 30 seconds now, we need to like shift to the pre-chorus, where, you know, and we have to write this, you know, come up with this very distinct sound, you know.
Right. Yeah. And that's also partly why it's easier for singular producers and like less than like teams and stuff. You don't see like huge ambient music teams. It's normally like singular producers, maybe a duo, or I mean, I guess there's some bands that are ambient bands, but because sort of all you're doing is capturing a headspace, right? You're just sort of taking a vibe.
Yeah, and there is a surprising amount of like collaboration. Like I know what gets mentioned is one of the things that brought Lustmord to a lot of people's put him on a lot of people's radars was the joint project with Robert Rich, Stalker, which was in like 1994. That is actually how I found Lustmord, all that, like, you know, years ago. Because I was on a big Robert Rich kick.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
yeah. Not traditionally musical. And it also is something to say that Brian Williams' Lustmord is from Wales. And if I had to live in Wales, this is how I would feel too. Just kidding.
I interview him and say, how much do you think being from Wales has influenced?
Yeah, being Welsh.
It is the most heavily castellated region on Earth. Would have had plenty of interesting old ruins to record in, assuming he's done any of that. Like, I feel like you have to have, right?
Right.
If you're recording in crypts and tombs and shit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You have to have used some old castle.
Right. Absolutely. I want to do that.
Yeah. I mean, all joking aside, I imagine existing in growing up, again, in an area that has a higher density of ruined structures, old ruined structures than, almost anywhere else you could live.
Yeah. And also it's cold, and there's, like, fog and shit, and, just goats roaming the countryside and shit.
Madness.
It's
growing up in the fields of asphodel.
Yeah, it's a fucking completely different world to the one that I live in.
Desert hellscape. Concrete desert hellscape.
Yeah, and yeah, even outside of that, just like barren and beautiful, but yeah, very different. Well, you want to do ratings?
Sure.
I feel like it's about time.
Hard.
Yeah, I don't even know if all the rating scales even apply to this kind of music.
Yeah.
Listenability is high, because I think that's sort of the point of the music. It's high for people who like this sort of thing and get it. I think getting it is a big part of it. But I would obviously it'd be incredibly low for someone who doesn't like this kind of music. People would either be annoyed or very bored. Which, that's fine. So I think the listenability is going to be like an 8 or a 9, or it's going to be like a 3 or a 2, depending on who you. For me, it's like an 8 or a 9. I mean, I like this genre. I like zoning out because I do it a lot, anyways. Musicianship is almost non-applicable. Not that there isn't musicianship as an element, but in the way that we see musicianship, that almost doesn't happen at all.
Yeah.
But in terms of design, it's very good. So I don't even know if I have a number. Weird factor / originality. That's another tough one. These are all tough because the concept is relatively original as terms of albums go. I mean, are there lots of works about the nuclear bomb and stuff? Yes. Are there lots of dark ambient albums that, to someone who didn't listen to this genre, if you put this one on and then you put the other one on, would they be able to tell the difference at all? I don't know. But I still think it's pretty original. I don't know. Cohesion, yes. Just yes. Yes. Although there's like fade outs between some of the tracks. There's like spaces at the end of some of the tracks of just silence. Like a couple seconds.
Within some of the tracks.
Yeah. Which I don't like it even for an ambient album. I want there to be at least a little bit of something going on. But it's cohesive. I mean, it's cohesive to the point of you could play one track and play a different track, and if you hadn't listened to it before, would you be able to tell? You know what I'm saying? So that's my ratings. Overall, still applies, but
yeah, I'm gonna fall pretty much into the same camp, in that I do think this stuff is very difficult to rate along conventional scales. At least, certainly, like based on what we have been establishing these criteria to mean, based on the way we use them in reviews of previous albums. A lot of it's not incredibly applicable. I think the production here is excellent. The creation of a sense of space is excellent. But yeah, like musicianship in terms of like how well instruments are being played is very, very hard. So yeah, for me, listenability is like, I would agree 8 or 9, probably 8. Just because any kind of, I think because of the way I tend to use and engage with ambient music, having any kind of verbal content can kind of pull me out of it for a second. I'll actually bump it to an 8.5 because these are used so artfully that it was not super obtrusive.
Right. That's interesting that the verbal content pulls you out, because I like verbal content in ambient music.
Yeah, no, I liked it. It's just I will frequently, because for like my typical use cases, like I'm using it to meditate, or like,
oh, that's fair,
as background music for like an RPG, or you know, as an accompaniment to reading or some other kind of creative process, and like just having words will kind of pull my focus for a little bit. But I do think it actually serves it and massages this better in the direction of like a contemplative, a more overt contemplative meditation, right? And that, you know, this is, it massages you, it uses the verbal content to get you thinking about and kind of sitting with and on the subject matter at hand, which is, you know, this tremendous capacity for self-annihilation that we've unlocked and sequestered out of sight. So yeah, fuck it. I'll keep it at 8.5 just because that purpose means that I can't, you know, just put it on for anything. But I do still think it's very easy and inviting and very easy to stay with. It's not offensive, but again, very enveloping. Yeah, musicianship, not applicable. If we were to translate it into, like, you know, if we were to use like sound design or arrangement as a category instead, excellent. Just really nothing feels out of place or unnecessary. There's an incredible economy and like precision, and it manages to be very evocative without feeling preachy. So yeah, that would be like 8.59 if we were to talk about, you know, arrangement and sound design instead of musicianship. Cohesion also, yeah, yes, kind of hard to. I also agree that like total silence, I understand using it. It is the sort of thing that frequently makes me check to see if there's something wrong with my playback device.
Yes, same.
So while I do think that there is a space for silence in music, it is the sort of thing, and maybe that's just because like it's only a problem the first time you listen to it, because once you know it's there, you know to expect it, right?
Right.
But it can pull you out as opposed to leave you with a moment of
reflection.
emptiness.
Yeah.
lastly, weird factor. Yeah, again, I think the whole genre is incredibly weird.
Yeah.
But within the genre, yeah, it's not exceptionally strange. It's still effective. I will say, like, I was surprised at how much I appreciated it, and how again, like, completely not preachy it managed to be, because for me, generally speaking, whenever somebody picks as emotionally charged of a symbol as the nuclear bomb, there's a part of me that, like, immediately rolls my eyes.
Right.
Because it's low-hanging fruit, but I think in many ways this album serves as an excellent critique of that response that I would normally have. This, like, the fact that we've let it become this sort of thing that's reduced to this, like, shorthand for, like, oh, humans suck.
Right.
Like, as opposed to sitting with the, like, truly awesome, like, in the literal sense, destructive power of these things that we just take for granted. It did a good switcheroo on me, is what I'm saying. I came in expecting it to be this sort of like yeah, nukes, we know. But it really did a better job of grounding me with, like, just thinking about what the implications for that, for our species, really are.
Right.
And for the planet as a whole. So that almost gives it another weird point. Again, I can't really assign it a rating, but it is weird that the thesis statement is so, like, clear.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at, like, Atrium Carceri, who's another dark ambient composer, it's established that, like, he has a fucking storyline that he's been playing out over the, like, tens of albums that he's released, but, like, it's not explicitly told, at least verbally, right?
Right.
So he knows what's transpiring and is telling the story of a world, but the fact that, again, like, the use of this very tangible semantic content, telling, like, the fact that the album's very clearly stating what it's about, is actually a little weird for the ambient genre.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I still can't give it a number.
Absolutely. And I think this one, it feels a little more, it feels a little less like symbolism, and I think that's part of the reason why it doesn't seem so heavy-handed, is it feels less like symbolism and more documentary, almost. Like, it feels more like just presenting you with something and not telling you how to feel about it, but, like, just showing you sort of an inherent side of something, as opposed to going, oh, look at the nuke, oh, the nuke is so bad, oh, the nuke is scary, even though that is what it's doing. Like, yeah, I don't know.
I completely agree. I think, again, it's making the nuke an object of contemplation rather than, like, a tool of condemnation, as it were, right? Like rather than as an instrument to be like, man, humanity sucks. It's just like, these things that we have made are fucking terrifying. You know, their innate nature is literally awe-inspiring. And yeah, it lets you have the response on your own. It doesn't try and force it. It's not preachy. You're right. It is more documentary style.
Yeah. All right. Overall, I think I'll give it an 8. I really liked it. I like it better than a lot of dark ambient that I've listened to, but it is not my absolute favorite dark ambient piece that I've ever heard. I should say it that way. Like, it's definitely a cut above, but it's not the best one. Yeah. But it is a genre I like, and I like the piece.
at the risk of being accused of succumbing to groupthink, I'm pretty same boat. 8. Same feelings really. It's that I think it is really good dark ambient. Not my favorite. There is a lot of bad dark ambient.
Yeah.
Or not, and admittedly, like, it's the sort of thing where, you know, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. There's a lot of just really mediocre dark ambient, and this is notably quite good.
Yeah. There are certain... How do I put it? There are certain things where if, like, a dark ambient piece is, like, named something, I just won't listen to it in the first place because it's kind of, like, you already know what you're getting into. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, if it's named, like, Cthulhu, I'm just not going to listen to it.
Yeah. Lovecraft is pretty played out.
Yeah.
Like, we get it. Giant reverbs and, like, knocking sounds.
Yeah.
Please say something, like, something a little newer, please.
Yeah. And it's like, if you take Lovecraft and you kind of do your own thing with sort of the ideas, you could do brilliant things. But if you're literally just taking Lovecraft and then just doing Lovecraft, I mean, I do think dark ambient is a great genre for Lovecraft. And I do like Lovecraft, but, like, yeah, it's just been done, I guess.
Yeah. You absolutely get.
Yeah.
They say what is dead may never die, but
it's only in Stranger Eons that death may die. Are we in the Stranger Eons yet? I don't know. Yeah.
But yeah. Well done, Lustmord. Good, frankly, good fucking album for 2020.
Yeah.
I sort of get why, like, for an artist who has typically been taken more sidelong approaches to, like, to his subject matter, choosing, like, 2020 as the year to release something explicitly about humanity's capacity, you know, capacity for self-destruction, was the right year for it.
Hold on. Discography, see all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 releases in 2020.
Jesus Christ.
Oh my.
Presumably the rest are, like, film score work, right?
Yeah, one is a collaborative thing called The Fall. One is The Empty Man original motion picture soundtrack. Then there's Trinity. There's one just called Berlin.
Yeah, that I think is a live performance.
Then Lublin, Hobart. I think those are all live performances. Machine Fest, Stockholm, and then The Things That Were, which seems like it is an old work that was...
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't listened to it, so I couldn't tell you if it's remastered or just republished or whatever. So, yeah, Trinity is the only actual album, but still lots of the stuff. An impressive amount of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is going to wrap it up for us. Make sure to like, subscribe, check out the playlist, follow on Twitch. Tell me what you think. Tell me what we should listen to. See you later.